A respected black judge was wrongfully arrested at a small gas station, mistaken for a suspect simply because of how he looked. The officers who humiliated him acted out of fear and arrogance, blind to the truth inches from their grasp. But fate had its own sense of irony, for by morning the man they had handcuffed was the one sitting in judgment over them. And just listen to how shocking the turn of events in this drama was, and why justice ultimately prevailed. The night air carried the scent of damp asphalt and diesel as rain traced silver lines down the roof of the old gas station. Rural Alabama slept beyond the reach of the flickering neon lights, leaving the forecourt an isolated island of buzzing fluorescence. Water ran into the cracks of the pavement, gathering in small pools that mirrored the humming sign overhead. Carl's Quick Stop. Marcus Hall tightened his coat around him as he stood beside his car, the nozzle clicking softly as fuel filled the tank. The hum of the pump was the only sound for miles. He had been driving for hours, heading home from visiting his father's grave. The trip always made him thoughtful. It reminded him of promises left unfinished, to serve right, to hold steady, to keep dignity alive even when the world didn't. Tonight, his thoughts drifted between grief and exhaustion. He had spent the day reviewing case files for an upcoming trial, and his mind buzzed with passages of law. It was one of those evenings when silence feels heavy but comforting, when the world seems momentarily steady. He looked like any tired traveler stopping to refuel before dawn, a black man in his 40s, dressed in worn jeans, sneakers, and a faded university sweatshirt. Nothing about him spoke of power or position, and that quiet anonymity on this night would become its own kind of danger. The rumble of engines broke the stillness. 2 patrol cars pulled in fast, tires hissing on wet pavement. Their lights flashed across the puddles, painting the ground in alternating red and blue. Marcus turned instinctively, his brow furrowing in confusion. The station was empty but for him and the attendant inside. Both car doors opened at once. Officers Jason Miller and Scott Renner stepped out, their movements sharp and rehearsed. Their hands hovered near their holsters, their eyes locked on Marcus. "Sir, keep your hands where we can see them." Miller's voice was loud enough to cut through the rain. Marcus froze, one hand still holding the gas pump. "Officers," he said calmly, "what seems to be the problem?" "Step away from the vehicle," Renner ordered. "You match the description of a suspect in a theft reported nearby." Marcus blinked in disbelief. "A suspect?" "I've just been driving home. Hands on the hood," Miller snapped. Marcus hesitated only a second before setting the nozzle aside and raising his hands. Years in courtrooms had taught him that compliance could be the difference between escalation and control. But as they closed in, the reality settled hard. His credentials, his years of service, his commitment to justice, none of it stood between him and their assumptions. The first shove came quick, his chest meeting the cold metal of his car. His shoes slid slightly on the wet ground. Renner's flashlight beam swept over him, tracing his pockets with mechanical indifference. His wallet slipped from his jeans and hit the ground with a soft splash. The laminated ID card inside caught the beam of the flashlight. Honorable Marcus A. Hall, Circuit Court Judge, State of Alabama. For a fleeting moment, Marcus thought reason might return. But Miller bent down, picked up the wallet, and gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "Fake IDs now. Real clever." He tossed it back to the puddle. Marcus's jaw tightened. The metallic tang of blood rose in his mouth where his lip had split against the car. Every breath felt heavier, not from pain, but from humiliation. a slow burn that sat beneath the surface, deeper than anger, deeper than words. Inside the station, the attendant glanced through the window, frozen in place. A couple of cars pulled in to refuel, their drivers slowing as they caught sight of the scene. Phone screens rose into the night, recording. The weight of the moment pressed down on Marcus, not only as a man being wronged, but as someone who had sworn to uphold what was right. The irony twisted like a knife. The law, his life's shield, now acting as his weaponizer. The rain kept falling, the flashing lights reflected in the puddles, blurring into one color. Marcus stood there, silent, as humiliation melted into a fierce quietness inside him, the kind that doesn't scream but remembers. The county jail was quiet, except for the hum of the ventilation and the erratic flicker of overhead fluorescent lights. The walls were painted a dull, peeling beige, and the floor, though swept, still carried faint scuffs from years of restless footsteps. Marcus Hall sat on a long steel bench bolted to the wall, its cold surface leaching warmth from him. His fingers tapped against the metal in a slow, measured rhythm, the only sound he allowed himself to make. He had been processed without ceremony, fingerprinted, photographed, and led through corridors where the echo of closing doors tracked his path. Hours had passed since he first stepped into the holding cell. Each request he made to speak to legal aid was met with indifference. An officer standing watch simply shrugged, offering no explanation, as if time itself was part of the punishment. Marcus kept his shoulders squared and his breathing level, but inside, every minute stretched his frustration into something heavier. It wasn't just about Jason Miller or Scott Renner, the officers who had pulled him from the gas station. It was about the machine behind them, one that had spent decades perfecting the art of suspicion toward men who looked like him. He thought about the case files waiting back at his office, the names of defendants who had spoken in court about late-night stops, unexplained searches, and being held without cause. Marcus had heard those testimonies before, had sometimes set them aside as exaggerations born out of fear. Now, alone with the metallic taste of his own arrest still lingering, he wondered how often he had underestimated their truth. Footsteps approached in the hallway outside, slow, deliberate, heavy enough to signal authority. The holding cell door opened, and Chief Deputy Ward stepped in. His presence filled the room. A tall man in a crisp uniform, the kind whose posture alone says he believes the space belongs to him. He looked Marcus over as though confirming inventory. "So, Mr. Hall," Ward began, his tone carrying a faint note of amusement, "you still claiming to be a judge?" Marcus sat upright, meeting his gaze. His voice stayed steady, devoid of any plea. "I don't claim it," he said evenly. "I am one." The sentence hung between them. The room seemed quieter now, as if the building itself paused to listen. Ward's eyes narrowed slightly, the amusement fading into something harder to read. "Then you know how this works?" Ward replied after a moment, pacing a step closer. "Sit tight until we sort your mix-up." He left a deliberate pause before that last word, as though framing Marcus's reality as an inconvenience. Marcus watched him leave without breaking the rhythm of his fingertips against the bench. Pain welled inside him, but not the kind that came from the arrest itself or the cold bench under him. It was the deeper ache of knowing that 20 years of service, hundreds of cases presided over, countless nights spent crafting fair judgments, could be disregarded in an instant, eroded by one night of mistaken identity paired with bias that could not see past skin. In that quiet cell, his mind wandered back to younger days on the bench, moments when defendants pleaded injustice, and Marcus silently wondered if they had molded their experiences into self-defense narratives. Now, with his dignity standing trial in an unofficial court of perception, that quiet skepticism hardened into recognition. Reality had a way of humbling conviction, stripping away any illusions he carried about impartiality in the world beyond case law. The hours wore on. Time lost its distinction, marked only by the occasional echo from the corridor and the constant hum overhead. Somewhere in that stretch of night, his perspective shifted. His anger for himself dulled into something steadier, sharper, anger for the countless faces that had passed before him in the courtroom, stories that mirrored his own more than he had once been willing to believe. When the door finally closed again after Ward's visit, Marcus stopped drumming his fingers and folded his hands in his lap. He no longer sat as a man waiting to be cleared. He sat as a man preparing for the moment when this experience would become the foundation of something far greater. The following morning dawned gray and heavy, a soft drizzle slipping down the courthouse windows as townspeople gathered outside, drawn by whispers that spread through the night. Inside, the county courthouse stirred with a quiet tension, the kind that ripples before something irreversible takes place. Every clerk, officer, and deputy moved carefully, voices low, glances quick and uncertain. By the time the courtroom doors opened to the public, curiosity had turned into unease. 2 uniformed officers stood near the bench, stiff and silent. Jason Miller's hands fidgeted at his belt. Scott Renner's eyes darted from the floor to the back of the room, unable to hold a steady gaze. They were waiting to be seen, not by a superior officer or an internal investigator, but by the man they had handcuffed the night before. Word had spread across the county before sunrise. The man arrested at the gas station, the one accused of pretending to be a judge, had indeed been a judge, not just any judge, but one of the most respected names in the district, Honorable Marcus A. Hall. When the side door opened and Marcus stepped in, the shift in the air was palpable. He was dressed differently now, the black judicial robe resting on his shoulders like a curtain drawn between 2 worlds. The quiet man from the gas station was gone. In his place stood the authority of law personified. The courtroom clerk swallowed hard before speaking. "All rise." Her voice cracked mid-sentence. The crowd obeyed instantly, chairs scraping against the wood floor in chaotic unison. Marcus took his seat at the bench, his posture composed, his expression unreadable. The robe did not merely restore his authority, it reclaimed his dignity. Yet there was no visible triumph in his face. His calmness was deliberate. It carried the weight of what restraint meant when every provocation urged the opposite. Miller's complexion had drained of color. Renner's jaw clenched tight enough to tremble. Between them stood a silence louder than apology. "Gentlemen," Marcus began, his voice even and deliberate, carrying easily through the room, "I understand you were involved in a mistaken arrest last night." The phrasing was gentle, but it echoed with quiet consequence. No accusation, just precision, the kind that lets truth speak for itself. "You have the right to counsel," he continued, "but you also have the duty to truth." His words fell without effort, but each landed with intent. The courtroom seemed suspended. Even the ticking wall clock hesitated. The officers exchanged nervous glances before beginning their explanations, short, uneven, and tangled in uncertainty. "Sir, it was a faulty description. Procedural miscommunication. Standard protocol, Your Honor." Their voices blended into a chorus of self-preservation. Each phrase sounded smaller than the one before it. Marcus listened, unmoving. His silence pressed against them more than any raised voice could. It wasn't vengeance. It was reflection, discipline, and disappointment, all wrapped in quiet gravity. When the officers finished, the room waited for Marcus's response. He took a slow breath, the stillness stretching like the pause before a verdict. Then, in a tone neither harsh nor gentle, he spoke. "The law," he said, "is not a weapon for your fear." He looked up from the papers on his desk and met each officer's eyes in turn. "It's a shield for every citizen, even the ones you choose not to see." The line carried no anger, but it struck with precision. The power of the words settled deep, not just in Miller and Renner, but in every person present. It made them reevaluate what justice truly meant beyond courtroom decorum and procedure. Marcus concluded the session as any other. Sentences filed, decorum maintained, order acknowledged. His rulings were unbiased and carefully worded. Yet, for everyone present, this hearing was no routine proceeding. It was a reckoning, not written into the docket, but felt in the weight of silence that lingered long after the gavel's echo faded. When Marcus finally rose to leave, the crowd didn't applaud or whisper. They simply watched in reverent stillness, realizing they had witnessed a lesson, one not just about power or profession, but about integrity under fire. Outside, the drizzle had turned into light rain, the courthouse steps glistening under the gray morning. Justice on this day had not shouted. It had spoken softly, and that made it ring all the louder. By evening, the story had traveled far beyond county lines. News networks interrupted regular programming with footage of a man in worn jeans and a sweatshirt being restrained at a dimly lit gas station, followed immediately by images of the same man hours later, commanding the bench in full judicial robe. The contrast was striking. One image bearing the weight of humiliation, the other standing as a testament to composure and rightful authority. Commentators debated the meaning behind it. Some called the moment poetic justice, the kind of real-life irony that perfectly reveals the flaws in a system. Others described it as a wake-up call, an unfiltered look at how perception can shift depending entirely on what someone wears, the title attached to their name, or who grants them recognition. But for Marcus Hall, it was neither a poetic twist nor a mere call to awareness. It was something quieter, something more deliberate. In his mind, the arrest was not the conclusion. It was the beginning of a mission sharpened by lived truth. Within months, Marcus announced the formation of a judicial review initiative aimed specifically at bias training and accountability practices for law enforcement across the state. This was no symbolic gesture. His program required measurable change, documented reforms, and independent oversight to ensure that what happened to him, and what happened to countless others without a platform, could be prevented, not just acknowledged. Officers Jason Miller and Scott Renner each faced internal disciplinary measures. Their actions were reviewed under departmental protocol. Retraining was mandatory, and formal reprimands entered their records. But Marcus, despite having every legal and emotional reason to press further, refused to shape his mission around the punishment of two men. He understood they were operating within a culture that had shaped them long before that night. For him, the greater challenge lay in dismantling the deeper structures that allowed such assumptions to thrive unchecked. His decision was met with mixed reactions. Some praised his restraint, others questioned it. But for Marcus, the choice was clear. To pursue reform meant focusing on the root, not the branch. Months later, Addressing a hall filled with young law students, Marcus stood behind a wooden lectern, its surface worn smooth by years of speeches and lectures. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long beams across rows of attentive faces. "Injustice," he began, voice even yet resonant, "will find you when it thinks you cannot fight. Sometimes it finds you in open daylight. Other times it creeps in quietly, through moments no one else sees." He paused, his gaze moving deliberately across the room. "But the real victory," he continued, "is not proving it wrong in that instant. The real victory is changing the very world that allowed it to exist in the first place." His words carried the weight of someone who had lived the contrast. The hands seized at a gas station, and the same hands signing judicial orders from the bench. They were not abstract principles. They were lessons earned through personal trial. The audience rose in collective applause. It was not the loud cheer of celebration, but the kind of acknowledgment reserved for truths that settled deeply within each listener. Those who clapped understood they were witnessing not just a speech, but a transformation. Marcus stood there for a moment, letting the stir of voices and movement wash over him. The same hands that had once trembled holding a gas pump now pressed firmly against the lectern, steady and assured, guiding the future of justice in the room before him. His smile was faint, almost private. It was not born of pride in overcoming personal injury, nor satisfaction at public recognition. It was the quiet peace of knowing that pain had been shaped into purpose, that humiliation had been forged into a tool for change. Marcus Hall had turned pain into law, and law into light, and in doing so had reminded all who heard his story that justice is not only a verdict delivered in court, but a lasting legacy built far beyond its walls.